Live. Welcome to the original state of the nation. My name is Ssali, and this is the state of the nation. Today is Sunday. Muchimanyi tuli mu mwaka mpya, the first state of the nation 2022. I hope you're as excited as we are. Before we start, as always, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto African Alumni Association operates for thousands of years. It has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place, I keep on forgetting that last part of the, which I shouldn't, because if I do, it will get me in trouble. But yeah, today this meeting place is still home to many indigenous people from across the Turtle Island, and we are grateful to work on this land. Welcome to the State of the Nation. My name is Ssali. This is the original State of the Nation. I have two distinguished guests, not really guests, founders pretty much, for the State of the Nation. As you know, our doctor-to-be is here with us today, Dr. David Kajoba, and of course, our legal mind, the master, LLM. Counsel Julius Mitala is here to interrogate the issues with us today. We are talking about Mr. Kakwenza Rukila Basaija's lockup. Is it legal? We don't know. Is it necessary? We don't know. We are going to hear these conversations. Should he be locked up? What did he do? Did it warrant him getting arrested in a manner in which he got arrested? Of course, all these are questions that many of you have in mind. It's almost 2 weeks since the arrest of Mr. Kakwenza. And of course, for those of you who had the chance to read my preamble, you have seen that the counsel that represents Mr. Kakwenza has alleged that, or revealed, I could say revealed pretty much, because I don't know if it's an allegation. I'm going to take it as truth until proven untrue. Mr. Eron Kiiza says that Mr. Kakwenza has been heavily tortured. He is isolated, and of course is illegally being held by the SFC. So some people are asking, who is the SFC? They call them the Special Forces Command. There are some MPs that have intimated that this part of the force, the UPDF, is illegal because it was not constitutionally structured, or it's not within the structures of the UPDF Act. Mr. or Honorable Nganda has been very adamant about pointing out that the SFC is illegal. The SFC was never constitutionally set up or established, and therefore he says that this SFC thing is illegal. Is it illegal? Should it be arresting citizens of the country? These are all questions we are going to interrogate. But first, why don't I ask my colleagues to say hello to you? You already know them, Mr. Kajoba. People are excited to have you back. So tell us where you have been and what you have in mind for 2022. Are you excited about 2022?
Yes.
Unmute yourself, Mr. Kajoba, and yeah, let's go.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, indeed. I'm happy to be back. I am delighted to be joining this conversation. It's been a while, to be honest. I have missed these deliberations. I have been around the world, engaged in some activities that have made it a bit difficult and challenging to be here as much as I would have loved to. But I'm delighted to be back. It's a new year. We look forward to a great 2022. We hope that amidst the challenges that we go through, probably we can begin to see the back end of the pandemic. I don't know. We hope that our conversations will continue, and let's hope that probably as we go along, our conversations will cease to be questions of whether or not institutions in our country exist constitutionally or not. It is a disturbing state of affairs if we are still having these conversations in this day and age, especially after we welcomed and ushered in what many called a fundamental change some years ago. But we hope and we continue to believe that our tomorrow will try to be better than today. And it is our responsibility and duty as different stakeholders, citizens, professionals, scholars, and indeed, caring people of Uganda to continue interrogating these issues as we continue to forge a Uganda that works for all of us. I'm so delighted to be joining you, Henry, this morning, together with Julius and all those that are joining us. I look forward to a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kajoba, Doctor to be. I keep on reminding you that because I want to challenge you to keep studying, man. I know this is a lonely place, and I say it from experience. So when I say doctor to be, it's to encourage you to continue reading amidst the loneliness that encompass our environment. Counsel Julius Mitala, muzukulu wa Muswangali. Buliko omwaka gwagenze gutya mu baloya tulina ebibuuzo bingi nnyo ebyokubabuuza. We were here one of the sessions last year talking about freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and we are here today, the first week pretty much of January, talking about freedom of expression once again being infringed upon by the powers that be. Mr. Julius Mitala, Counsel Sebo, how are you doing?
I am very fine, Henry. It's very lovely to be back here. You know, in the new year, in the new year 2020. I especially welcome back. You know, my colleague, my friend, Dr. Kajoba David. You know, it's a pleasure to have you back here. In the background, I've been saying that this is the original state of the nation. You know, we can skip the introductions because I think this is where the conversation started from almost maybe 2 years ago or a year ago, something like that. But it's a pleasure to be back here, and I take this opportunity, you know, to wish everybody who is following us, you know, friends, colleagues, partners in every sense, fans and followers, a very happy new year. I hope we can look forward to better times and a more peaceful and more kind of prosperous new year 2020. I'm tagging my Christmas, you know,
2022.
jumper 2022. Yeah, I'm tagging my Christmas jumper for a purpose because I've got friends who are from the Orthodox community, and I know they are just celebrating their Christmas. Theirs just happened on the 7th, whereas I was on the 25th. You know, a month ago. Theirs has just taken place, so they are still in festive mood. So turkeys, you know, and or a bit tafu, you're not at this point in time. So for those of you who are still in celebration mode, we wish you all the very best of celebrations, and of course to wish you a very peaceful and prosperous new year 2022. For me, I've said that this is my year. It's my year to roar. People always set targets and objectives at the beginning of the year, and it is important. So for some people, it's not something that's very important, but I think it's important to set some kind of direction and vision, you know, against the sorts of things that you would want to accomplish. But on the sidelines of that, for me personally, this is a bit of a sad show that we are really doing because obviously Mr. Rukirabasaija Kakwenza has been on this show with us a few times. I've never met him personally, you know, but I've interacted with him here, and I think he's a very he's a very decent man. I think he's a very amiable guy. I think he's a very eloquent man. He speaks his mind. And to find ourselves in a situation that today this is the subject of debate and conversation that has, engulfed the whole nation and possibly beyond, because obviously if you scan, editorials, newspapers and, headlines across the globe, the sorts of things that have been reported on this subject are quite really sad. And I think for us as Ugandans, this is something that's really, we have to be concerned about. So I hope we can be able to explore, the lawlessness around this whole process and be able to find some kind of answers about what possibly should be done. I mean, as a nation, as a people, what do we really aspire to have in this day and age? Is it okay that we can engage in fights of this nature, which end up, so bloody like that? I mean, I think for me, it's really, this is an opportunity for us to examine our national consciousness. These sorts of things are being talked about again and again and again. Some people they tend to criticize the masses, and they say that Ugandans are possibly unconcerned about these sorts of things that are happening. But I do not think that Ugandans are unconcerned about these sorts of things. I think it's very dangerous, for the victims to be blamed for a crime that has been committed against them. So I think this is a sad conversation, but I hope we can be able to draw out some kind of narratives and be able to set the narrative and, see how we can be able to navigate this kind of ugly scenario, looking for a better Uganda really. I think that's where we are as far as my assessment is concerned on this.
That is where we are as far as his assessment is. Of course, Mr. Kakwenza Rukirabasaija is a distinguished member of the state of the nation. He has been here several times. He has discussed his previous arrest on this very platform. We are having this discussion first in his celebration as a human rights defender, someone who speaks not just his mind, but also the minds of so many other people who are not courageous enough to speak their mind when they must. I want to celebrate those people who have been standing up with him, people who are still standing up with him, like Comrade Namiaro, Patricia. I know he has been putting up his profile picture since his arrest. Namiaro, thank you so much. I know you are following this conversation. Arthur K, thank you so much for following this conversation. I know you have been posting a lot of free Kakwenza paracards. So thank you so much for that. Rachel Hope, thank you so much for following us. Happy New Year to you as well. Of course, the distinguished Dr. Stella Nyanzi and her new poem to celebrate Mr. Kakwenza Rukirabasaija. Of course, Counsel Eron Kiiza, who has also been part of this conversation, talking about human rights in Uganda, is still in the arena fighting for Mr. Kakwenza, a person who has been fighting not just for himself, but for other people, now being thrown into jail, which jail we don't even know where he is. It has been alleged that he has been tortured. He is in isolation, and apparently his wife has sued some of the institutions that are implicated into his arrest. There are so many things to talk about Mr. Kakwenza Rukirabasaija, but let us start with a very disturbing conversation between two councils in Uganda. People bawandi badde balowooza nti ensonga bazitegeera bulungi nnyo bonna, naye nga buli omu alina approach ye on how to view this scenario, this case study. Of course, we live in a democratic country. We would like to believe that we live in a democratic country, even though it is very clear that the courts of law have not been respected in terms of the orders they made, because there are so many different understanding of how this case is being approached. Naye katutandike ne ka clip kano wammanga counsel bano babadde bagamba kikuteeka oba ku nsonga ya mwami Lukira Basajja okubeera nga ali mu court.
Tesitamanyi. Tosobola kugamba omuntu abadde tortured afuka musaayi akola ki in the absence of evidence. Na evidence y'engoye oli awo gitambo ogamba ngoye tetumanyi oba nazize. Tuli bannamateeka. Evidence ya njawulo si ngoye zokka. Engoye weeziri n'abamulaba weebali sobola kubakubira n'essimu kati saagala Abannayuganda okubalimba kino be sijja kukkiriza. Ndi mu studio sijja kukkiriza olimba Bannayuganda. Evidence ya njawulo. Evidence eri ya munwa, evidence eri ya ngoye ya bifaananyi twabikubye abaliko mukyala yaliko abaana nga weebali kati ogamba ki
ogusirisa mpaka
sijja mpaka naye sijja kukkiriza kino lwoje wano tulimbe
omaze okwogera njogere
naye sijja kukkiriza nti olimbe wano nze sijja kukkiriza kino sijja kukkiriza bwebibamu ebyokulimba nze enfuluma n'emuleka wano
genda oba ogenda nedda mwamuwadde omukisa ndowooza kammale ensonga yange naye ayogere
nze ekisijja kukkiriza wano Soroti TV bya bulimba
fenna tuli bannamateeka ayogedde ebibye nange kanjogere ebyange ekisooka omaye buli wootandika okwanukula amazima bino bye bivaayo gwe oba olina bwinowo olina ow'omutwala
naye si kituufu Kakwenza kati ali mukomera si kituufu Kakwenza ali mukomera kimenya amateeka aba tekimenya amateeka
kati ekisooka bino ebyokujubisa evidence teriiwo
evidence njikulaze ebifaananyi webiri evidence weeri ekyo kita evidence tetujja kukikiriza
kati ye kaayogere
evidence weeri omukyala waali tusobola okumukubira essimu kati n'omuteeka ku line okitegeera olwo evidence togimanyi evidence togimanyi evidence omukyala tali hearsay omukyala yaliwo ng'alaba kino be evidence togimanyi wampise kuwuliriza obulimba wampise kuwuliriza obulimba no sisirimbye ndimbye nki ndimbye ki yes naye ekyobulimba sijja kukikiriza wano omuntu amaze 10 days in detention. Okitegeera bamukubye kati oyagala kujja wano ngambye nti tebamukubye.
You say there is evidence.
Wamulabye Kakwenza wamulabyeko kino
wamulabye
samulabyeko
kati biki byoyo
mukyala yamulabye mukyala yamulabye
wali one
mukyala yamulabye
tugenda mu
right. We are starting on that note, and I am going to task the counsel in the house. Asobola atoka tusomese evidence chechi. Fe tumanyi ka story ajja natugamba. Kino kyabadde bwekiti ne bwekiti. Tukitwalanga, that's evidence. Right? Counsel Eron bwatugamba nti mukyala wa mwami Kakwenza yaliyo. Nalaba Kakwenza nga bamutochalinze nalaba gundize undergarments ze nga zirimu omusaayi era nga ebikufaananyi bye baakubye bye badde batambuza. Bwe bajja ne batugamba nti Kakwenza bamutochalinga. Nsonga gye tulina okuwakana nti nno ddala tebamutochalinga. Tutandike awo. I know it's kind of complicated okugenda mu mateeka naye nga njagala gwotubuulireko nga gwe munnamateeka ffe abantu ffe tulowooza oli bajja n'aŋŋamba nti nno omusajja bamukubye ebifaananyi bye biibyo nina okukkiriza oyo ky'aŋŋambye. Why are you pressing us to show you son evidence or sin or son? I don't know what the right participle there is. Mr. Muzukuru wa Muswangali.
I think in those ekitandikirwako, the very first point for us to consider here is let's agree on the facts. That's those ones that are beyond the dispute. One of those facts is that Kakwenza was arrested. One of those facts was that Kakwenza has been kept incommunicado, without communication, without access to his lawyer, without access to people, his family and his friends and so on and so forth. at this point as we speak, I'm pretty sure that people do not know the exact location of where Kakwenza is. So that's a fact. That's beyond dispute. And we know for a fact that he raised an alarm when he was being picked up. He raised an alarm. I think if you go on his Twitter page, even as we speak right now, if you go on his Twitter page, the last thing he tweeted out was that there was a bunch of people whom he described as gunmen who were picking him up. They were breaking into his house. And since then, he has not been seen in public. So that's a fact beyond dispute. The next thing is that there was a tweet that was attributed to a very senior army officer in the moments following that, where he said that he wanted this to be a lesson to all those who think that they can abuse him and get away with it. So
he has since deleted it.
He has since deleted it, but we live in the digital age. Things don't disappear. It's just a matter of searching the internet, and these tweets are everywhere. I mean, go onto the hashtag free Kakwenza rather, and you see if that tweet is not available. So those are all pieces of evidence. But what is it? I mean, in legal terms, evidence is a statement that can be relied on in court to prove a fact. That evidence can be a hard exhibit, maybe like a book or a gun or a sword or anything that can be physical evidence. That evidence can be circumstantial evidence. And I think in this case, if you try to construe it on surrounding what you would call circumstantial evidence, we are saying that we know for a fact that Kakwenza was picked up. We know for a fact that he had a dispute or a disagreement or an engagement, a public fallout with people on Twitter. We know that people tweeted and said that they were going to teach him a lesson. So that's all circumstantial evidence. And then you've got what we call hearsay evidence. Now, hearsay evidence is kind of very technical. It's very interesting because this is evidence that is gathered from a third party. It's not evidence that is spoken by a witness directly, but it's evidence that is gathered from a third party. Statements that are uttered by a third party, and they can be relied on in court to prove a statement of fact. And this is where we are, because people who have seen Kakwenza, because we have not heard from Kakwenza himself, we've not his lawyer has not been able to make contact with him. We are only hearing things from other people, third parties who have apparently seen him and who have seen what has happened to him, and they are telling us that this is what it is. So that is hearsay evidence. The rules do permit for such evidences to be, proven in court. And I think in this kind of scenario, this is what Eron is trying to point at, that if you put the pieces together, the physical evidence of the physical disappearance of Kakwenza, the circumstantial evidence around it, and that now being supported by the hearsay evidence from third parties who have apparently seen him, all that put together can be relied on court to prove a certain point of fact that the man was arrested, that he's missing, and possibly he has been subject to some form of mistreatment. And now the other thing that really comes into play is that, truly and honestly, and this is really my critical view here, is that, a person who makes or who cannot make an accusation in broad daylight, they shouldn't be believed. There's no basis for somebody making an accusation, while hiding his face. If a crime has been committed, we live in a free country, we live in a democracy, there is a court system. Bring the man up, put him before the judges, and lay the charges against him. So, as I said, putting all these things together, I think it demonstrates that there is something that is clearly sinister that has either happened to Kakwenza or something sinister is happening to him. And I think that is really something for us to be worried about. One of the renowned, American presidents once said that, if the rights of one man are threatened, then the rights of every man are under threat. And this is exactly where we are. And I think we are in that critical position now. And this is what I was trying to say, to talk about earlier in our introductions, that a lot of Ugandans, there's been this talk, from certain sections of the society where people tend to blame, the public and the masses and tell them that, Ugandans, they are lazy. Maybe they deserve what is happening to them. And I think I want to disagree with that, because I think it's very difficult and it's very dishonorable actually to blame the victim. I think for me, way I'm looking at this is that this there's an interesting book that I would recommend for you guys to read. It's called The Modern Ku Klux Klan. It's a book written by somebody called Henry Fry something, Henry P. Fry. It's called the Modern Ku Klux Klan. I think it's a book that's very interesting. It talks about
but before we go into that book, let us come back to Mr. Kakwenza. And njagala kuwulira Mwami Kajoba kikyalowooza for this issue. I'm pretty sure you have been following this issue, like many other people that have been following it. Mukyala Ndagire Remy, weeyanziza okuba nti otugoberera. Thank you so much for following. For those of you who are following, please, if you have any comment, any questions, don't hesitate to post it in the comments. But first, Mwami Kajoba, kubyowulidde Counsel Julius byayogera ne ku byebadde owulira coming up to this stage. What are your thoughts about Mr. Kakwenza? Our human rights safe? Are we safe? Can we express ourselves freely without thinking about unexamined repercussions? And I use the word unexamined deliberately because I know you're a philosopher.
Thank you, so. Ensonga za Uganda, they usually render you speechless, don't they? I'm a big believer in the disciplines of the humanities and in the enterprise of logic, critical thinking, and academic inquiry, intellectual inquiry.
Right.
There are few things that in this world frustrate me as much as seeing someone who otherwise would be respectable as indeed an educated person make certain arguments. Anyway, away from that, I have two questions in my head. Can we say that Mwami Kakwenza was arrested? Or was he kidnapped? Because we might be going about this the wrong way.
Right.
Should we be discussing an arrest or a kidnap? Because the little I know about the legal procedures, and I come off this acknowledging my limitations in that regard, and I stand corrected. Julius is here. When a person is arrested, apart from certain exceptional circumstances, if any, one, a warrant needs to be presented.
Right.
Because you have to show cause, for arresting somebody. And we know that when you arrest them, they are gazetted institutions within every jurisdiction, every country, where an arrested person should be kept. So we say, for example, so-and-so has been arrested, and the arresting officer is known, and the place of their holding is known. So that is an arrest. And in that case, we know, the little I know about legal processes is the arrested person is entitled to at least a phone call to a lawyer. Because they need to have representation. They deserve fair hearing. Actually, what Julius is okunyabako wano, but anything that is said before this person accesses their privilege to legal representation is usually inadmissible. You know, it's usually inadmissible. Kakati njagala okubuuza, if Bwana Kakwenza was arrested, one, who was the arresting officer? Was there a warrant? Where is he being held? At what police station is he being held in Uganda? If the lawyer is lying to the country, because we asked the question, has he had access to his lawyer as a citizen of Uganda?
Right.
Now, I am not oblivious to the fact that we live in complex times. Things can be politicized. Kale, we could say, someone would make an argument and say, well, his lawyer is just politicizing things. He had access to him. We allowed him to see Bwana Kakwenza. Okay. Ngomukulu oli bwakoze argument into where is the evidence. Can they present evidence that his lawyer was legally allowed access to him to dismiss his allegations that there was no access? These are the questions that are going through, my mind. And then there is a claim. So if this person was not arrested, and there is no record of this, Kubanga police, recently, I think, was it the police that came out and said he's being held on charges of, is it offensive communication?
Offensive communication, yeah.
Offensive communication, granted. Mm-hmm. Now, I have stood here and I've said this and I say it again. When someone commits a crime, regardless of who you are, you need to be charged. But to be charged according to the laws of the land. If Bwana Kakwenza, and I say this without fear of contradiction, if Bwana Kakwenza is guilty of offensive communication? Why is he not presented in court? Where is the case being heard?
What are the charges?
What are the charges? Where is the charge sheet? Can we have access to that? Can we give him a day in court? Unless now we need to begin, and if all the things are not happening, then we need to go back and re-ask, are we discussing an arrest or a kidnap? Was there, probably perhaps in Uganda, there is a provision where there are what we call legal kidnaps in the country. Does the family, or shouldn't the lawyer be considering filing for a missing persons report in some regard? But then we can't say missing person because we have sections within the government that have come out to say that is being held over something.
Right.
So then it becomes what one might call legal kidnap. And then we might now need to invite the Juliuses of this world and other legal minds so that we can begin having a conversation about the parameters of legal kidnapping in our country. So that we know that it is gazetted within our system. Then we know as Ugandans that this is something in the realm of expectations.
Absolutely.
Now, on the issue of whether Bwana Kakwenza was tortured and the denial thereof, Omukulugundi, I don't know what's the name of that gentleman. He was asking,
Mr. Chinove.
Bwana Chinove. He was asking for where is the evidence? Nze nakulira mu kyalo for part of my life. Oli bweyajjanga ewuwo ng'akuvunaana okubba olweyo lwe. Ng'ogamba nti so and so stole my broom. Nti namulabye ng'alubba n'alutwala. N'ogamba I have not stolen his broom. Sinnabba ku lweyo lwe. Okay? Bw'oba tewabbye lweyo. Ogamba ennyumba yiino
checking.
Nestowa yino mujje olwerwa muwa mululabayo. And when I went to boarding school, when someone claimed that his uniform was stolen or his shoes, the warden would come into the dormitory. Okay, tukebere ya byechi engato za mukuru Ssali. And almost 9 times out of 10, when they check the suitcases, bagenda okubikula esanduko y'omuntu omu. Engato za bwana Ssali mweziri nga yonumbya bye engato zani za bwana Ssali.
Right.
Kakati, if you're saying Bwana Kakwenza was not tortured, okay, fine. Can you show us the untortured Bwana Kakwenza?
Right.
The courts of law have spoken. Nezigamba release him. Okay? He has not been released. Never filing present him dead or either the body or the living person. We have not seen him. And you are still saying the man was not tortured. And you're asking this person, where is the evidence that he was tortured? Now, I want to ask one actually the same question. Where is the evidence that he wasn't tortured?
Right.
Because what you're doing is olemeza kufuru ku kesi yo nayo gamba zisina kwata kusina bba ku ngatozo zisija nayo ganyo kugula kufuru tugamba gula open the suitcase, we checked. You're saying I won't open my suitcase, I didn't steal the shoes. Now, I can't speak to this legally because I am not a legal scholar. But I am a man who I think is above average in terms of common sense. I consider myself slightly above average in common sense. So in a common sense conversation, and in the court of public opinion, who is likely to be believed? One, because there are things that make us believe in things, what you call belief, or the state of mind called believing. One, belief and the faith is based on history. Very important. For many people, they believe things because they have seen certain things happen in history. For example, if you're going to have confidence in Mr. Ssali's abilities to do certain things, there are things I trust Bwana Ssali because he has proven through my history and relationship with him that Bwana Ssali can deliver on this. The reason why I've been invited here on the State of the Nation, because Bwana Ssali has prior belief that Mukuru Kajoba ne Mukuru Muzukuru wa Muswanga can have a conversation about matters like this. And because of that history, that we believe that therefore they can be good voices to this matter. We do have history in this country of people being arrested with limbs and they come back limping. We have history in our country of people going into detention without umbali and they come back nenkovu zibatagenda nazo. One of the traumas caused by being imprisoned, that somehow when you enter the walls of detention in our country, Uganda, somehow the experience of being locked up kind of brings embali on the body. Then it is likely that when people go into this detention, someone inflicts these imbalis. So if there is a claim that someone was tortured, and we have history of people going in and coming back different from when they went, people who went walking well, coming back limping, then there is likely a case to be answered. But ultimately, for me, this worries me as a fairly leveled Ugandan. Because, Singa, if I'm a Ugandan right now, and I hear people at my door, banging down my door, and I look through the window and they're holding guns, how am I to tell whether I am being attacked by thugs or I'm being attacked by the state when the state somehow functions as thugs? So how are we to draw the line? When am I to call the police that is supposed to protect me? And when am I supposed to know that no, this time this is an arrest. When am I supposed to run? Because I'm in danger because of thugs coming in. And when am I supposed to stay knowing, no, these are not thugs, but this is my government taking me in to answer for certain things. In a country where recently we had cases of suspects being shot because they were perceived to be resisting arrest. But when the arresting bodies are beginning to look like criminals, so how can I know when I'm supposed to run for my life because I'm being attacked by thugs? And when am I to know that I won't be shot because it's actually the state, and this will be translated as running away or resisting arrest? These are the problems we are creating with these actions from those that are supposed to protect us.
I think a very quick comment, and I know Henry would like to interject on this very quickly, but a very quick comeback on that. I think I would say in my language, I would say ditto to everything that Kajoba has said, because I mean, these are the boiling questions, really, that, you know, as a nation that we've got to be asking ourselves. You know, I think for me, as I was starting off earlier, I said there is this general level of lawlessness that prevails, you know, in the country, and it's a shame that these are the things that we were promised, and we've been told again and again and again, that the people who are in charge of the country today, these are the things that they went to fight about to make sure that these sorts of things will never happen again in the existence of Uganda. If you look at the preamble of Uganda Constitution 1995, it's very clear, trying to illustrate that, you know, traumatic history that we had went through, a very traumatic political turmoil. And the constitution, people came together, and the people of Uganda, referring to themselves as we, the people of Uganda, you know, accepting that this is the sort of operation memorandum we've kind of designed for ourselves, and this is how we want to be governed, this is how we want to conduct ourselves. And all these things are very clear here, you know, within our constitution, the national objectives, you know, to cultivate a democratic country based on democratic principles that you know, encourages national unity and the protection of the fundamental rights and freedoms of the people, right through all the articles, Article 1, Article 24, 27, you know, the administration of justice, you know, how does the court relate in these sorts of scenarios, you know. It's really, I think it's really sad. And I think for me, what I could tell from this is that I think as a country, we now have to come to an acceptance that we have arrived at a state where our constitution has become meaningless completely. And I think when we are in that state of lawlessness, in a state of unconstitutionalism, which is, I think, is where I place ourselves now, I think every Ugandan has to be really, really worried. It's unbelievable, because these sorts of things did happen before, you know. And but you know what? I think for me, one of the positives that possibly come out of this scenario is that you know, for the first time, you know, these deliberate acts of lawlessness have been laid right bare at the doorfront of a particular individual. I think that is something that positive, you know, because things have been happening, as Kajoba has been narrating and explaining here. You know, people have been detained, people have been beaten, people have gone through this kind of horrendous treatments. You know, people's manhoods have been maimed. You know, these things are very clearly, you know, articulated. The Uganda Human Rights Commission, these kind of reports are always there. You know, but I think until now, it has never been so obvious that these kind of things can be directly attributed to the state. And I think for me, this is the positive outcome of this, that for the first time, perhaps we could be in a position where we can say that these general acts of lawlessness have been dropped, you know, barely and squarely at the doorfront of a particular individual. I think that is a positive we can take away from, you know. Obviously, the emperor might want to deny these acts, you know, that they have been committed by his organization or not. But I think, as I said before, you know, you just have to scan. And I think, again, Mr. Kajoba, cites the public opinion, because this is it's an important space to bring public opinion to where it is, Now, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, and I think this is again very interesting, that I know that within people in the armed forces, in the police, in the probation service, in the prison service, in the army, in SFC, in everywhere, we know that there are people there who are very highly educated, respectable people who take their careers very respectable, and they hold their service to the nation as something that is gold and prime. I just wonder how these people feel about all these happenings in the country, because that is an important question as well. If you work for an institution, Henry, that is again and again and again and again cited, in engaging in illegal activity, I mean, what would be the measure of your pride in that institution?
I think that's one of the questions Mr. Kakwenza was actually asking. So not Kakwenza, Mr. Kajoba was asking earlier on. How do we differentiate between thugs and government?
Because these are things that I think the people who are in charge of the nation, these are things that they really need to. I've seen there is a drive to recruit young men and women into the armed forces. Again, if you use Twitter, because this war originated on Twitter, so it's only fair that you can look on Twitter and see what's happening in the nation. So there's a drive currently as we speak. There's a drive calling on the gallant young men and women of Uganda, to put themselves forward for national service, which I think is a very important thing. And I would encourage people. Why not? Who doesn't want to offer your services to the nation? In some countries, national service is mandatory. If you go to countries like Nigeria, you have to go through national service. It's mandatory. It's inescapable. We are in a position where, in our place, it's a voluntary scheme. The invitation is out there, and those who feel that they want to be associated, or they feel they have something to offer, you go in and offer your service. But riding on the back of these sorts of ugly things that are happening within motherland, how do the people in leadership, whom I know they are lawyers there, they are doctors, they are people with master's degrees in the army, they are excellent people, whose track record is unassailable. I would want to look at them and ask them a very sincere and honest question, as a sincere and honest Ugandan, how would they feel about the states and the sorts of things that have been, attributed to the institutions that they do serve?
How do you think Mr. Chinobe feels? Because you know Mr. Chinobe very well. He was the president of the Uganda Law Society. As one of his subordinates, how do you think he feels?
Just to correct that a little bit, I am not a subordinate of Mr. Chinobe.
Not anymore.
Not at all. Maybe we might share a passion in something, but I am not a subordinate of him. I've never worked under him. But
okay.
I think what I could say is that as lawyers, the primary duty is to court. I think there is a court procedure, there is a court process, and I think as a lawyer, he would really understand the significance and consequence of an allegation of contempt of court. Because we saw the magistrate made an order for the man to be released. It's almost about 11 days later, and nothing has happened. And I think that tells a lot, about the state of lawlessness that we are talking about. The Ugandan constitution, just before you come in there, I just want to emphasize it because this is important. I think it's either Article 128 of the Ugandan constitution talks about the administration of justice, in the country, and how courts of judicature are supposed to carry themselves. That the state must do everything within its power to support these institutions towards advancing this kind of processes and procedures. Now, if the court has made directions, and these directions have obviously been ignored, and we have a set, whichever political stream or color you would want to wear, But as a lawyer, somebody who is familiar with legal processes and procedures, I think everybody would know that we have a duty to support court and to promote court. You know, so that is a question that I would leave to Mr. Chinobe to answer for himself and examine himself and see whether in the current scenario of what is taking place, whether his assertions are reasonable or not.
Well, at this point, I'm not sure if he's even able to examine himself, but of course, that's a question for him to digest and decide if he has the ability or the capability to examine himself, let alone
and
the
maybe a quick one on that. You know, I think we do have a history as a culture, really, of, for lack of a better word, this notion that when we were young, in my language, we say, "Omukuru tasobya." The notion that accumulating a certain, you know, number of years in terms of existence somehow makes someone almost unchallengeable, you know. You know, over the years, I have had to reinterrogate the concept of experience and age. I've had to reimagine it from the quantity of time to the quality of time. You know, because you and I both know that one of the biggest shocks bw'ogenda okula is realizing that okukula tekutegeeza nti omuntu ategeera nnyo ekiri awo. Kuba naawe ogenda neweesanga naawe si gwe ategeera ennyo ali awo. You know, and also holding positions of, if you like, esteem doesn't necessarily translate into being a very good mind and expert at anything, you know. So if I am, let's say, the chair in my profession, of the body governing my profession, it probably says much about my administrative qualities, more than it says anything about my prowess in the profession itself. That can always be discussed in that regard. But we also know that when the eyes begin being blurred by the haze of privilege, it is oftentimes that we stop to see certain things, you know. You stop to see certain things. So I'm very much against this notion of so and so gundi yagambye what. You know, we can only say that if after examination gundi yagambye stands on the pedestal of what? Of reasonability, common sense, and logic. And when, because if we're being in an environment where the courts are issuing orders, which orders are not followed in regard to the person in question, and the person who esteems themselves as legal minds comes down and their point of emphasis is what you like to call gymnastics of evidence, then I am very sorry, but my respect in their assertions becomes challenged to a degree. Yes.
Yeah, I think for me, I would really like to applaud Eron, Mr. Kakwenza's, legal representative. I think he's done a good job. He's put up a spirited fight that any lawyer would put up, in regards to defending their client's rights, because that is really critical. But as we're here, I also want us to really, think about Mr. Kakwenza's state of mind. What's possibly happening to him, at a mental state? Because
but the thing is, before we think about what Kakwenza is thinking, we need to examine some of the structures that are holding him up. If it is true that that Mr. Kakwenza is being held up by SFC, which, as I intimated in my first submission, Honorable Ibrahim Semujunganda atugambye emirundi n'emirundi the SFC teriimu mu UPDF Act, which means it is not a legal entity in Uganda. SFC wabanga teri legal entity in Uganda, how do we challenge an illegal entity that is infringing upon the laws of the land or arresting citizens of a country? And this is a conversation that should be engaged in by members of parliament. They are pretty much the people who should be examining these questions. I don't know if they are examining them, and we're just not hearing about it. But if it is true that the SFC is not legally instituted within our constitution, how does it continue to do all these silly or illegal things while we'll continue looking? Officers by UPDF, the people who believe in the UPDF, the people we assume to be the seniors of the UPDF, those who believe in that institution, why are they silent when these continue to happen? And why would the commander of the SFC make such an order without being challenged either by the institutions we have or the three arms that are still functioning? Of course, the courts of law have come out to challenge that arrest, although they are going through the police. I'm not sure if it was conducted by the police. But how about the legislature? What is the legislature doing to challenge this arrest? Era tulina kusala magezi kyokulaba nti Kakwenza ava yonna yonna gye bamukidnappingidde oba gye bamuarrestingidde, okulaba nti no, he gets his freedom. Because if Kakwenza has no freedom, if his freedom was kidnapped or legally arrested, how does he regain that freedom? Because without Kakwenza's freedom, none of us is free.
Yeah. I have to acknowledge my limitation on this one, because to be honest, I'm not an expert in military affairs. Maybe if I was able to speak to somebody who has got particular expertise in military law, maybe they would be able to throw some kind of focus. And I also want to say that I have not had chance, to read or scan the UPDF Act and all the other, legislations in our place to be able to ascertain the legality, of this institution or not. For all I know is that there must be structures within the army. It's a very meritorious kind of institution where somebody reports to somebody. So the hierarchy of power and the hierarchy, the structure and hierarchy of administration in the army possibly is the most organized kind of hierarchy, in any kind of institution that we can ever think about outside the Roman Catholic Church. So, and again, that question really becomes very important. And it also brings in the question of accountability of people who hold public office. What can they do and what can they what is within their remit? I mean, Kajoba asked a very pertinent question when we started this show. Then, how do you know who is carrying out with sort of exercise, and under which regime, under what kind of legal authority are they exercising that authority, etc. If the SFC went and purported to arrest terrorists, people who've been planting bombs and killing civilians and things like that, I wouldn't have a qualm about that, because obviously this is an issue of serious public safety. And I think that is actually the expectation, is the prime expectation from Ugandans, that the UPDF, the People's Army, the professional army. Mr. Museveni, the president, has on so many occasions, highlighted as one of his priorities, in trying to professionalize the army. And professionalizing the army doesn't really, it's not just really about giving them the most shiny uniforms and attires and boats and so on and so and swords and so on and so forth. It's also going to be reflected in the character, in the conduct of the people who wear the army, the uniform, and how do they relate, with the with civil society. So for me, that's where really the issue is. But on a subject of accountability, I remember, and I think it could be somewhere, possibly on public record, President Museveni has stated before that he once had to let go of his brother, General Ssali, from being the army commander. And the reason he did that was because, allegedly, and I'm reporting this verbatim, allegedly that General Ssali was a drunkard. That's the reason. According to Mr. Museveni, this is what he has stated. The reason he had to let go of his brother as head of the army, I think it was somewhere in 1989 or something like that, is because he found that his brother was not competent, because he was, he had a problem with drinking. Now, if the president could move on account of something that's personal like that, is there a possibility that he could move his hand when something that directly in kind of a charge is laid against his son directly? Can he possibly move and relieve him of that position and enable some kind of how would I call it, some level of investigation or some kind of review to try to understand what is really happening in these structures? It's disturbing, really. I don't really seem to understand. And I many times, many times, Henry and David, many times my approach is I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, because I know that occupying a public office is not also something easy. There will be lots of things. There will be lots of challenges. There is intrigue. There is people who are just resistant of your authority. So sometimes you are forced to act in a certain way. But when it goes to the point of, an institution acting in a fundamentally a manner that is extra legal, I have a problem there. I really do have a problem there. But as I said, I am not an expert in these sorts of things. I'm only stating things from what I would desire to see,
Yeah. I don't think you need to be an expert on this. I think the UPDF Act is a public document. There's no mention of Special Forces Command. As far as the 2005 UPDF Act is concerned, we do not see any mention of the word Special Forces Command. So I say that is a matter of fact. There's no mention of SFC within the 2005 UPDF Act. So ekyo kintu tekyetaaga kukola ki kugenda mu kooti kukiinterpretinga. That act is public. The 2005 Act is public. Sife twagikola tusoma nsomye naffe tusoma ebintu babituwa buwi naffe ne tubisoma. Within the composition of the UPDF Act, we do not see the word SFC unless it was given a different name as a security measure. As far as arresting, that's another question that we need to interrogate. Who does the army arrest and in which manner? As far as the UPDF Act is concerned, there's a mention of the word arrests is mentioned 6 times. None of them talks about arresting people in the manner that Mr. Kakwenza was arrested, if it is indeed true that he was arrested by some section of the UPDF called the SFC. So that's something else that we need to interrogate, of course, because on part 4 of the UPDF Act, actually part 7, not part 4, part 7 of the UPDF Act, which talks about arrests such as handling of persons arrested. They say that arrests generally, a person who has committed, is found committing, is suspected of being about to commit, or is suspected of or charged under this act is having committed a service offense may be placed under arrest. Well, I'm trying to figure out if Mr. Kakwenza is part of all these. Soldiers may, without warrant. Part 4. A soldier may, without warrant, conduct the arrest of a member of the defense forces or any rank who is wanted to answer charges in respect to any of the following offenses: murder, treason, mutiny, rape, defilement, desertion, breaking concealment, careless shooting of a fellow soldier or civilian, or any other offense carrying maximum death sentence.
Yeah.
There are other things that I've missed out. Njagala kuwa abantu bonna omukisa okubeera nti basobola okusoma the UPDF Act wherever they find it. If you want it shared, I can definitely share it. But Mwami Kajoba, what are your thoughts?
Just before you do that, could you just quickly read out the long title, because that UPDF Act would exactly state which matter.
I've shared the act. I've shared the act in the private chat, so I read through it. But Mwami Kajoba, please proceed.
Mwami Ssali, nze omanyi saasoma nnyo nga mmwe era ebintu by'amateeka bino sibitegeera nnyo kiri awo. Naye I tell myself that I am a student of life. Ate mu Luganda bagamba ndi musajja nnekkenneenya. Okwekkenneenya. How do we translate that into English?
Okwekkenneenya. Hey, in English.
Somebody who's got attention to detail.
Yeah, I try to pay attention to detail. My non-educated view of the UPDF's mandate is mostly the army. If my non-educated mandate, my understanding of the mandate, it handles the enemies of the state.
Can I just give you some very quick information, because I think that will be useful. According to this act, the Uganda People's Defense Act 2005, it's an act to provide for the regulation of the Uganda People's Defense Forces in accordance with Article 210 of the Constitution. So my analysis on that is that it specifically deals with matters to do within the forces. So anything that is civil, the sorts of things that we are seeing, civil disagreements, the sorts of me and Henry exchanging and fighting and disagreeing on Twitter, those are not matters that fall within the remit of the Uganda People's Defense Forces. That's a civil and police matter.
My understanding is it is the enemies of the state, and it also could handle citizens who are considered to be members of the force.
Please use the word suspected, because if you say considered, that is a bit too light. Those people must be suspected of aligning themselves with those kind of enemy forces in one or another. Yeah.
Or other aspects would be misconduct, as you've just read out, of members of the armed forces, all right? Because they have different principles in certain respects from the rest of us, the wananchi, you know. I have been hard pressed in my mind to, you know, waliwo ebintu ebituukawo mu nsi ne byowaaza ensi. For example, omuzadde yayokezza omwana we emimwa olw'okubanga yanoonya essukaali. Every time you read a headline like that, it astounds anyone who tries to think. Because you look at the proportion of, one, it is a child. Two, anunye sukari. How much can a child kununa that warrants so kumuoche emimwa okumusaraki emimwa? I have been trying to understand, to put in terms, and I try to consider myself one person who can really try and think deeply, but I have failed to understand why you need SFC to knock down someone whose door at night, whose crime is offensive communication. It baffles. It baffles. Now, I do not condone abuse. I do not. Now, I don't know whether within the parameters of that law of communication, Mr. Kakwenza has a case to answer. I don't know. And I think if he has a case to answer, I'll be the first. I've been with him here on this platform, and I'll tell him to his face that Kakwenza, if you take got communication in Uganda and you are Ugandan, okay, then you should have a case to answer to the courts of law. I'll tell him that straightforward.
In fact, when he comes back here, we should ask him that, Mr. Kakwenza, did you break the law?
Yes.
And then maybe he can tell us himself, you know.
We hope he comes back. But, you know, what I do not understand, why would the army, when we have enemies from outside, why would our army, the defense army, the professional army, be involved in arresting a civilian for abusing someone on Twitter?
But I think, and I'm sorry to interject here, because of it, I do this at the risk of kind of disorganizing your line of argument. But I think what I possibly would want to look at is that maybe to say that the entire army has got involved in this kind of process, maybe would be taking it a bit too far. I think for me, I would like to narrow it down to say that why would a senior army officer, you know, because he has had a fallout with somebody in a public space, why would they feel that they've got to use their power of office to want to calm down on somebody with whom they have had a civil disagreement? Because this is not this is not an issue for the UPDF as a whole. I think when we do
for the UPDF, because the entire army is quiet.
Bwana Julius, I disagree. Because among us, the people who have even been on charge sheets and who have had a thing or two to say, for example, who came out to speak about where he was arrested and what he was arrested for? I think that was the police. So the moment you come out and own this, then you have closed this, because they haven't distanced themselves from this. The UPDF hasn't distanced itself from the SFC. The police hasn't distanced itself from this arrest. And so they are saying that within our framework, within our jurisdiction. This is part of what is acceptable.
In effect, it's official policy.
It is official policy. Because they haven't distanced themselves from it. Because we do have institutions have come out, okay, to distance themselves from things. For example, we have had instances recently whereby the police has said, we didn't do that. That was the army, isn't it? We have that. But they haven't distanced themselves. So for me, they're equally culpable. And it is even more disturbing because like you've mentioned, if someone had a disagreement with a certain officer on Twitter and he said probably certain things and was offensive in communication, like we're told, and the entire army of a nation gets down with the state apparatus that heavy of the army. Not just the army, if it is true as we hear, special forces, by the name itself, it means these people have specialized training, they have specialized tactics. To arrest a civilian, for me, it is disturbing, and there is cause to where I am going. For me, this is the latest episode in something that I call the deinstitutionalization and reinstitutionalization of our country's institutions. Because every institution, we know, every institution has specific ways of functioning. Every institutions have what we call stable, valued, and recurrent patterns of behavior. So I think what we are seeing in Uganda, we are seeing a deconstruction of patterns, of behaviors, of our institutions. We are seeing a deconstruction of what hitherto were considered stable patterns of our institutions. We are seeing a destabilization of what hitherto were considered stable patterns of our institutions to, if you like, a new pattern that is unprecedented. Take an example. We always thought, and when I was growing up and going to school, we studied about the 3 arms of government. And among the things we learned through the arms of the government was the mandate of each arm of the government. So the judiciary having the power in such matters like the ones that we are discussing right now. The judiciary has spoken and said someone needs to be released. That person has not been released. What that means, therefore, is that now what we used to think was the mandate of the judiciary has been reconditioned. And in certain contexts, it is no longer the mandate of the judiciary. We have seen very recently things that for many people are light statements. For example, when the head of state challenges the court about its procedure of bailing people out. And you see that consequently, in light of those that were in question at that time, you and I both know what has happened to their bail applications. For every stable state, it is necessary for the government to enjoy both effectiveness and legitimacy. Excuse me. To enjoy both effectiveness and legitimacy. For me, the unfortunate outcome of instances like this, of occurrences like this, is it brings the legitimacy of the state into question. Because for the state to have legitimacy, it needs to enjoy a certain degree of trust from its citizens. I fear that as a country, we are slowly but surely going down a road where people are continuously losing trust in our institutions. You see it on social media, whereby people say things like, Uganda judiciary. I think you have seen these statements, even from politicians. Now, we do sit here and we very neatly and, if you like, expertly argue and say the institutions are there. There are challenges, but the institutions are there. But we forget one thing. Institutions function in as far as people have trust in them. And when people lose trust in these institutions, then as a country we have a problem. So we are at a time whereby people have lost trust in the institution of the police. We're at a time where the spokesman of police is one of the #1 trending memes on social media in the country. Whereby one of the memes of dishonesty in Uganda are associated by the spokesperson of one of the most important institutions in the country, the police. Today, you see arguments, we're having arguments here, but who is the SFC? Why is the UPDF silent? And you hear the people begin talking things within the public court of opinion, whereby it is almost being believed that certain sections of the populace in Uganda are outside all these national institutions. And what that breeds in a country is the unfettered lawlessness, the unfettered, because instead of someone taking another person to the court, to the courts of law or to the police, the unfortunate results of that is increased things like mob justice. And when people see the state do things like this, how can now the state tell Chifesi, where do you get the legitimacy to tell people that do not act lawlessly, that if you suspect someone of a crime, mutwale ku koti? These are the problems that for me I fear, optimistic as I usually am, that unless these things are checked, Uganda might be tending towards a fragile and almost a failing state if this course of action continues in years to come. Because the effectiveness of strong-handedness is not sustainable. It is not sustainable in the long run. So, unless our leaders can reignite and rekindle our faith in our institutions, how can I believe that I can trust that if someone does wrong by me, I can run to the courts of law? If my government itself, if the government institutions themselves do not adhere to the same court of law. We have talked about the Constitution here. Where is the power of the Constitution? When, if true, like they say, that we have institutions functioning in the country that are unconstitutional, and we do not have a national conversation about that. What does that tell us about our Constitution? Is it not becoming a well-written document devoid of significance? And what does that say about the future of our country and the future of our children? So, and I marvel, for example, I don't know, maybe I'm misinformed. Has this issue been tabled in the National Legislative Assembly to be discussed? Have we discussed the fragile, uncomfortable relationship between government institutions and the judiciary? Have we had this national conversation? And if not, when are we having this conversation? Or is it not a conversation worth having?
Very interesting questions there.
Those are very tough questions to engage with. Very interesting indeed. Ngabwe Nakugambi earlier on, these are conversations that should be engaged in by our legislators. I don't know if they are having these conversations. Of course, there's one person that I know has been consistent about informing the public. The SFC teri constitutional. We do not know about it. Honorable Ibrahim Semjunganda has been a member of the security committee, I believe, in Parliament, and has consistently reported to the public. SFC tetujimanyi teri constitutional. But I think he's the only one with that courage to continue telling us that SFC is not constitutional. It is very important that the people on the ground, people like me and you, start talking about this conversation until it probably resurfaces on the tables of our legislators, on the round tables of our legislators. So maybe they can have some courage to start talking about these issues. But with that in mind, we need to devise ways on how we are going to help Kakwenza get rescued. Mr. Mitala.
Something comes to my mind straight away, and I think a tactical decision has been made. First of all, I've got to say that, the arrest of Kakwenza, for whoever's arrested him, I think it's a terrible miscalculation, because I think for whatever they intended to achieve, they have achieved exactly the opposite. I think the intention was that Kakwenza would be beaten, would be silenced, and he would be humiliated, and he would possibly disappear in the thin air. And I think, in my assessment, I think that is turning out to be a very completely different picture from what we are seeing, what's trending, what's developing in the news. As I said, the matter of Kakwenza has been picked up across the globe. Almost all international human rights organizations, the organization that awarded him an award as the pen writer of the year 2021, I think 2022, they have picked it up. There is various news articles that have appeared in the German press and everywhere. So I think coming from that, I think my assessment is that the intended effect seems to be the opposite. And I think it's a terrible miscalculation from that point of view, because, as I said before, and I want to repeat this, that I think for the first time, this level of lawlessness has been laid bare and directly at the door front of a particular individual. And mind you, there are court processes, there are court orders. These are not things that go away very quickly like that. They tend to stick because they become public records, and they can turn up at a time when you least expect them to turn up, even if it's just for academic reference. They can very quickly turn up. I did raise an issue yesterday, and I might appear to be kind of copying and pasting from somewhere, but I saw some meticulous lady, I can't remember what her name was, but she raised a fundamental question, and she said that, in this country of ours, Uganda, there are certain universities, there are young law students who are being taught about the three arms of government. That is the executive, the judiciary, and parliament. And they are being taught about that fundamental concept in legal theory, which is the principle of separation of power. And it kind of brings questions to you, that what sorts of lessons are these people getting from what they are seeing that's happening, when we have a system that categorically ignores, those bare concepts of separation of power. Court has said something, and without any without any consciousness of whatever, people just decide to ignore it. And I think for me, I can answer that question, and I can understand what has happened here. I think a tactical decision has been made. I think an assessment has been made that it's better perhaps to hold Kakwenza and not get him to appear in public when he appears beaten and tortured and tormented. That would be a better alternative. That would be a far worse consequence, for Kakwenza to appear in that state, rather than disobeying a court order. So you can see, if you put those on a two-weighing scale, I don't know whether it makes sense here, because obviously there are two things here and they are both important things. So you either have a man whom we have been told that his manhood has been damaged so badly that he's even urinating blood, and these are not very simple accusations, because there are other people who have put these kinds of claims before, that they have been taken through this kind of humiliating torturing experiences, the inhuman treatment, and those are things that are at international parameters, the international instruments, so many of which Uganda is a party to. They clearly have a statement about this disallowing that kind of inhumane, torturous treatment against people, whether they are criminals or whatsoever. So I think it looks like a tactical decision has been made, because people who do these things, they understand the consequences. They know what it means. They know, for somebody to say that, hey, you have subjected me to severe torture and deprivation of my liberty. The people do understand this, and I think that decision has been made at a tactical level, that it's better perhaps to suffer the humiliation of disobeying a court order than presenting a man who has been severely tortured, or possibly whose parts of the body have been dismembered.
Is it morally right?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think that assessment has been made there. So it's not surprising. So I think the whole nation, it's not only the whole nation, but I think the entire world is watching, because these things,
when you say it's not surprising, is it not surprising to you, or is it not surprising to Ugandans that a court order has been completely ignored?
No, but we've been there. We've been there before. We've been there before. This is not the first thing this is happening.
I know, but when you say it's not surprising, it sounds like you are endorsing.
I use the statement "not surprising" in a painful manner.
Yeah, we cannot endorse that kind of behavior. I think we must blame that kind of behavior. The government of Uganda must not be teaching students about the three branches of government, while at the same time ignoring two of its those branches. For example, shouldn't be this behavior has happened before. In 2018, the government of Uganda evaded parliament during the course of legislation. And SFC was again a culprit in that process. SFC is coming back again, arresting people illegally. And Ugandan MPs have not spoken about how SFC was established and if it's legal and if it should be serving Ugandans. Because if it's an institution that is this powerful, why don't we know about that institution in the UPDF Act?
I think I really don't want to go so much into that, because, as I said, I'm not an expert in this area. But I've got a view as a Ugandan. As a Ugandan, I've got a view, and the view is that in certain matters of national security, of course, the state is entitled to put in place certain kind of structures.
We should know about all these entities. The Navy SEALs alone in the U.S. Army. We know about them
absolutely,
even when we are not U.S. citizens. Why don't we know about the SFC in the Ugandan context? And this cannot be normalized anymore. We cannot normalize idiocy within the
And
governance
of course,
of our country.
Henry, as I'm saying, that I am not trying to absolve anybody of a crime that has been committed. And I think if you listen to me carefully, this is what I'm repeating again, and at the expense of sounding repetitive of myself, that for me, what comes out of this whole Kakwenza thing is something that's so fundamentally important for people who are at the forefront of fighting for people's fundamental rights and freedoms and civil liberties. Because we are saying that for the first time, we have you've seen an application that's going to the High Court. I think it will be heard tomorrow, and it's naming the commander of the SFC, it's naming the attorney general, and I think it's naming a third person. You know, that's important. It's a critical development, because what that means that for the first time we have got these crimes, these excesses being directly dumped at the doorstep of particular individuals.
And that I think that application
I think we cannot undermine, we cannot underestimate the significance of that development. And this is where I really want to applaud, you know, Mr. Kakwenza's lawyer, that he's such a sharp, focused, kind of precise guy who knows exactly what he wants to achieve out of this process. Because if for anything else, I think we've been told before, it's been said before, that the court system, you know, the judiciary is on test. They have been put on the test, on the table. The spotlights are on them. I mean, these are matters of constitutional operation. I've done some kind of look into this. I think, and I did mention it before, that if you look at articles 126 of the Ugandan Constitution, I'm at liberty to read that out for you. I think under Article 128, they clearly state out these matters, how judicial powers are supposed to be applied, and it talks about the independence of those institutions. Now, how realistically can you say that our court system is independent when you have a scenario here where somebody follows due process, an application has been made to, you know, to produce somebody in court, a magistrate? I mean, what kind of scenario do we draw here? And this is why I'm saying that these kind of things, they inform future practice. These young people who are in school going through their legal academic theory, they are learning all about these things, and they are producing brilliant super essays about the concepts of separation of power. But what is the practical application of those concepts in our day-to-day practice? Because and I think this, again, this is one of the things that I was saying, that, you know, we don't want to construct this issue here as a specific court issue, because it's too broad. It almost encompasses on so many other, you know, critical and fundamental issues that as a nation we need to be able to look at and address, you know. Because there are issues like what is Uganda's political structure going to look like after Mr. Museveni has gone? Because that's something that's got to be looked at, you know. My view has always been that the person who will succeed Mr. Museveni will never, and I'm saying this, and I want this to be, if you can bring it back at a later stage, maybe in 10 years' time, the person who will succeed Mr. Museveni will never, ever again have the same influence and effect like the effect that Mr. Museveni has had on Uganda. And I think this is where the issue is. When you see this boxing, this flexing, people are trying to.
How do you know that person won't be as powerful as Mr. Museveni when the Parliament of Uganda right now is in the process of contemplating, taking away the rights of Ugandans from voting?
But those are all issues, and I think they point to a picture to.
So who is pulling those strings? And if that is indeed true, how do we know that whoever is voted in as the next so-called president of Uganda is not as powerful as Mr. Museveni? Mr. Kajoba.
Bwana Ssali, you and I and Bwana Mitala are students of history. And I need us not forget our history. I think our history will tell us that everywhere it has been, in the aftermath of a regime like the one we see in Uganda, most often than not, those that come later find a different populace compared to the one that was there before them. So I do share that prediction in mind. I do share that that the times, not just, we have seen governments that seem to have set barricades to keep themselves, almost building dynasties. We've seen these things break down in so quickly a time that we can't even find traces of them. So as a student of history, I am almost certain, also looking at the global world as it has turned out to be, and the wheels of change, and the waves of social justice, the waves of how our world is so dangerously polarized and interconnected today. Certainly, I do share the prediction that one shares. But anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about. A few years ago, Mr. Mao, the then president of DP, I don't know whether he's still the president.
He's still the president, yeah.
He's a life president, I think.
He wrote an article in the Daily Monitor, I think, that I enjoyed reading, where he referenced the law of unintended consequences in the rise of the then Rastaman Robert Kyagulanyi, that today is arguably one of the most prominent politicians in the country, one of them. You know, the law of unintended consequences basically argues that actions of peoples, but most especially governments, always have effects that are unanticipated or unintended. You know, sometimes when I look at certain government actions that come through in Uganda, I marvel and wonder whether certain actors have a good understanding of how different a government is from an individual in your living room playing with your phone. I think that is very important. I don't know if you guys ever ask yourself a question, because even a simple tweet, a tweet that I make as David is different from a tweet that a government official makes. Because when you are in government, whatever you say, whatever action you take has far-reaching consequences. This morning, I was thinking about this recent story that has been making waves when a certain public figure was clad in army.
Yeah.
in army regalia, if you like, and dressed full combat and took himself a video. I don't know whether it was a moment of getting carried away. I don't know whether it was deliberate, but whatever it was, this person took this video and it found its way to social media. And of course, as you expect, the moment I saw it, my mind was like, what has he done?
But don't you think that those things are intended to drive a certain message? It's like this message of showcase, of saying that, look, we are here. What can you do? I think for me, that's my interpretation of that.
We could interpret it either way. It could also be, some people call it diversionary. For some, people in some of the conversations I have with certain people in different circles, some people have called it a tactic to divert the national conversation away from Kakwenza to... it can be called many things. But you see, the other aspect in that issue is very recently here on the State of the Nation, we had a conversation about the arrest of certain people in the name of using army attire.
Yeah.
People were arrested and charged, apparently.
For wearing a beret.
For wearing the beret. And there was an argument that they should be presented into the court martial because their action was, if you like, in a way connected to the military. But in the aftermath of this event, a high-ranking member in the armed forces plays down this and says, well, it's a people who adore, someone who adores the great work of the UPDF. It is nothing. So, things like these have far-reaching implication. It is something that you could do in a moment of... one thing I've realized in my experience on my phone is I've met so many people who are great fighters on social media. But when you meet them in person, they cannot even engage you in a conversation. Because there is a way we get carried away behind our keyboards. So actions like these have far-reaching consequences. Because tomorrow, if someone wears the army apparel, if tomorrow I show up in Uganda, clad in, in that uniform, how are you then going to charge me?
With that tweet still on.
With a record of this.
Or record.
It might be a question of which political stream you support or you align yourself with. That could make the whole difference.
Exactly. So now when things like that happen, then what it does to the populace, it's like, wait a minute, this was not an exercise in enforcing the law. This was probably an exercise in suppressing a certain section of the population. But wait a second. They used government institutions that are supposed to be impartial arbiters. But they're the ones that you are used in the purpose of suppressing certain sections. And that further reiterates the view that in Uganda, we do not have separate government institutions. We do have, something that can be called anything. And what is my point in all this? Is actions of governments have consequences. So in activities like these, abusing court orders and disrespecting them, whatever your reasons are, I have to say, Ssali, do I think it is regrettable? Do I condemn it? Absolutely. Did I predict it would happen? Absolutely, I did. I knew as day when I saw that court order that it was not going to be responded to. Why? Because I'm a student of history. And history has showed me certain patterns. But what that does is it creates unintended consequences. For example, now we have an application to the Supreme Court of Uganda. And whatever the result of that application, the world is watching. The people are watching. International bodies are watching. The citizens are watching. And it is only a very myopic thinker that thinks that whichever the fate of Bwana Kakwenza right now, these things won't have lasting implications and impacts. Today, when we talk about previous regimes, for example, this government has been one of the masters in propaganda about previous regimes, how terrible they were. In fact, they almost define their successes and their contributions negatively from what others failed to do. But the thing is, all the things that we talk about here jokingly, so and so yali sabatu sapatu. We make all fun about these things. At the time when they happened, the people thought, well, beyaga tebalika ondera. Basobola okukola byonna byonna bye baagala. The population never forgets. And in this day and age of information, in this day and age whereby things happen in Uganda and Ugandans find out as quickly as a person finds out in Greenland, I think our government officials need to rethink their approach to certain things, because it is unfortunate for our brother Bwana Kakwenza. And I really hope there will be accountability. I hope some people will have to answer. I hope we get to a point where in our country, we get people resigning and charged for misuse of officers. But whether or not that is happening, I can tell you this. These actions continue to define this regime. And I hope, as I say this, if these are not actions condoned by the heads of this state, if these are not actions condoned in the executive, if they're not discussed, then we hope the executive will come out and prevail on some of these matters. Otherwise, we are creating an animal in Uganda that our children and our children's children will hold us responsible for. And the thing about these lawlessness, if you like, it doesn't only affect the wananchi like Kakwenza. It doesn't only affect those that are, if you like, outside the government. We have seen people who are recently powerful people in government crying out because they feel their rights are being abused by the very government that they were very vocal in supporting. So it is only a fool, and I'm sorry, forgive my language, who thinks, I think it has been said in history, that they came for this category of people. And we didn't say anything because we thought, well, it is them. When they came for these categories of people, if you see, for example, Kenya, let's say a country annexing Kenya, and then annexing Tanzania, and as Uganda, you sit back and say, Kenya, you are to be pitied, mostly amongst all people.
I think, as I always say to that, I just say in my language, I would say ditto to everything that Kajoba says, because I cannot disagree. I cannot agree anymore, because I think you just take everything and put it there as it is, because this is the real situation that we are faced with. But for me, I think what I would add on to that, and I was trying to talk about it before, and I said that I think the emperor has really been forced to act against his own clan in some situations. If I had audience with the president, I would say to him that, please, Mr. President, rein in on this matter. It's times can be so interesting. There's been a section of Ugandans that have now been they've been saying that, looking back in hindsight, President Milton Obote wasn't really the worst human being that ever existed in Uganda. Because at one point he was painted like, Obote, and everything was like Obote. And of course, this is not to say that there were no excesses that existed at that point in time. But there are people who are now saying to Mr. Obote in his graveyard, they are saying to him that, please forgive us, we misunderstood. We misunderstood the situation. And of course, where this points to is that the public has come to the conclusion. The public can clearly see that these excesses have gone over and beyond. So what I would say is that the emperor has really been forced to act against his own clan before. And if that's the case, and I think the reason he has done is to show some element of good faith, to demonstrate that he wishes to keep that invisible empire, you know, free from the control of lawless characters. I think that I would want to give the benefit of the doubt to the head of state. That maybe that is what his state of mind is. Obviously, he has told us here on public forums that no serving officer whatsoever under his control should be seen to be abusing human rights, and that's less than 6 months ago. You know, he was here on public record, and he really demolished, you know, all the security forces, the police and everything. And I said to them, it should not happen. You should not arrest people the way you are arresting them. We are still exactly at the same point. This is what creates that suspicion, is that this apparent benevolence of the head of state, is it real? Is it really real? Does it mean anything when he says the things that he says? Do they mean anything? So my cry out would be is that this movement of kind of lawless people acting extra legally, you know, cannot be really accepted. You know, I think it's wrong for us as a nation to even consider that we can live with that kind of situation, and people continue to laugh away like, you know, nothing has happened. As we've already highlighted before, that it was that great American statesman, the former President John F. Kennedy, that said, you know, that when the rights of one man have been threatened, the rights of all other men are under threat. So the fate of Kakwenza today must be a clear demonstration that regardless of where you sit, you know, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a student, whether you are, there is really here something that is really critical and needs to be fought for. And I do not think that in any way, form, or shape that it should really be for somebody who holds a public office to bring down the whole entire apparatus of the state organs to rein in on somebody with whom they have had a disagreement, you know, a civil disagreement for that matter. If Kakwenza had committed a horrendous crime, maybe he had raped somebody, or he had committed murder, or he had taken money out of, you know, impersonation of. I'm looking at this. I don't see where he really crossed the lines, to be honest.
My personal opinion, I think even the president is implicated in this issue. Because if he wasn't implicated, if he did not endorse what is going on, it wouldn't be happening. The fact that it's more than a dozen days and nothing has happened to date to Mr. Kakwenza. We know that the president knows what is going on, but he has decided to keep quiet because he endorsed it. And and as Mr. Kajoba said, that we are all students of history. We remember very well what happened to Dr. Nyanzi. The president was directly implicated in Dr. Nyanzi's arrest. She was also arrested under similar circumstances when she was coming from some sort of a conference, and she was thrown in the back of what they call these vans that arrest people. What are they called?
Drones.
The drones. There you go. So Stella, Dr. Stella Nyanzi was arrested under similar circumstances. Her engagement has slightly changed. The way she engages slightly different, but she still engages with them in one way or another. We don't know if Mr. Kakwenza is going to engage in a similar manner when he returns. But we're having a conversation about who owns Uganda now. Is it the people of Mr. President? Mr. President, when I say Mr. President, I mean Mr. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. And whether he is accountable to the people or not. And I think we did have this conversation with Mr. Spire. I don't know if you remember, Julius. I do have a clip that I want to play for Mr. Kajoba, and I want him to respond to that, to what we said in that conversation that missed out on about who owns the country, and if Mr. Museveni knows of his.
What are your thoughts on that?
It appears, maybe to put it lightly, the president seems to have acquired some sort of a complex. I don't know whether he acquired it along the way or earlier on were not able to see it and it was there. And that complex, or you may call it a hubris, is where he looks at himself as some sort of a savior for the entire country. So anyone who doesn't agree with him, for him it means that this is a person who is against, or who is not for the good of the country, because the idea of what is good for the country is somehow exclusively in his mind. And you either conform to what is in his mind, or you're some sort of a danger to the country. I think he's no longer able to appreciate any kind of criticism, no longer able to appreciate any disagreement with him. They are against the country, and being against the country means being against him. So he's the country now, he's the state, he's the laws, he's our future, he's our past, apart from the bad past that he has. And it's not really unique to him. Many leaders who have overstayed in power have acquired it. That if you have a lot of power for a long period of time, you start looking at yourself as some sort of a god. You start looking at the country as though it's your own project, as though it's at your mercy. It only gets what you permit, and what you don't permit, it cannot get. You can see some sort of an evolution in the speeches of Museveni, in his tendencies, in what he says. That earlier on he would say he's pro-people, even here by accident he says it these days. But it has metamorphosed into, I'm not your servant, metamorphosed into, I'm on my own mission, I'm a freedom fighter. So over time he has acquired that feeling that it's only him that knows what Uganda needs, and anyone outside that is not good for Uganda.
Well, that conversation was evaluating Museveni's new term, Mr. Museveni's new term, this very term, the new term, and how it's going to behave. Of course, it's not yet even a year before he was sworn in as the 60th president of Uganda, and these things are happening in his country. I don't know what Mr. Kajoba has to say about that. Do you agree with Mr. Spire? Can Mr. Museveni see the difference between...
Is this the Chisanja they call Hakuna Mchezo, or was it the former Chisanja?
This is the Chisanja called...
Oh, so this is the Hakuna Mchezo.
Secure in the future.
Hakuna Mchezo means, vaguely put, that we have no room. So, you know, for those Ugandans are mostly religious people, and the big percentage of them are Bible readers. There is another section where, you know, that edini wekula enyomwenge. You know, nti edini wekula enyomwenge. I think the idea that Bwana Spire, who I happen to be a big fan of actually, shared is evident even in corporate settings. For example, when you go to certain institutions of work, when someone has been at a job for a very long time, there's a certain sense of ownership, you know. They almost get, you know, for us, we have been here. We have seen. The same translates into families. Those who are older, even in families, when they have, you find this struggle, especially when children begin to grow and their parents are in the evenings of their lives. What this notion that the parents have their kids, you don't know anything. And I am your father. I know what you don't know what is good for you. You are confused. It seems to be a human complex. The notion that longevity translates into absolutism. I hit it on this at the beginning. This notion that because I am at a level of a PhD candidate, therefore I know all there is in my field.
Sometimes even beyond.
Even beyond. So you almost get this overinflated sense of who you are. It's that sense of ownership, you know, because your father is so and so, so therefore you feel you're untouchable. You know, you know, that sense. It is for me, it is an indicator of a people who have lost touch with reality. It is an indicator of a person who has lost touch with reality. Because if you haven't lost touch with reality, you quickly realize by looking around you that there are so many things that you probably are wrong about. Because the thing is, when you're new into something, you listen a lot, because there is almost a natural inclination psychologically of realizing that this is uncharted territory. This is new waters. So you listen more, you evaluate yourself more. But then as time goes by, the arrivalism takes charge of being there, done that. You know, you stop to care anymore. You stop to self-criticize and you stop to self-reflect. You see this in businesses. That is why startups, one of the biggest challenges to established organization, almost dynasties, also established businesses, are startups. Because startups come and they steer the waters. You know, when I was in my management class once, we studied about the fate of one of the very first telecommunication companies that came around, that gave us the first big, you know, I don't want to mention people's brands, but they gave us these big phones. If you remember, we both were growing up we were fairly young in the 90s. That is when the phones came into Uganda.
Yeah.
So there are those people who
they charged in dollars, you know. You need
yes,
somebody needed to have dollars.
Service fee, then and at the time, if you had the phone, no there is a way. And these were the known companies. They were the only people in the market. And when I was studying that course of management, I remember the professor said that at some point but what they did is, because they enjoyed this fast success, they forgot to evolve with the times. And new entrants came into the market and introduced certain brands of gadgets, to the extent that some of these first people into the market have disappeared in oblivion, because they failed to reinvent themselves. If a student of history, any functional systems that have lasted for a very long time, any organizations that have stood the test of time, there has been a continuous reinventing of themselves. That is why certain empires that we used to talk about, these empires today, they're not even the biggest economies in their own jurisdiction, because they fail to acknowledge the changing of the times. And in the process, because the thing about when you're at the top, everyone studies you, but you study nobody.
Because you're at the top. Yeah.
Because you're at the top. So they study you and they find a way to crack what you have and add new aspects into it. And then before you realize it, your relevance begins to wane. And if I could speak to the leaders of our country, I would tell them that if they have an interest in the continuous hold of Uganda, then the sooner they evolve to the times in which we live, the better. These draconian systems had their time, and they are gone, whether you like it or not. That is why you fail to find anyone anywhere supporting of you. That is why even countries where you think there is abuse of human rights, okay, they deny certain things. Certain things are not even on airwaves. So I think I agree with Bwana Spire in his assessment that there seems to have been a loss of, you know, like certain husbands after dating for a very long time. You know, when you're in a relationship, you're trying to impress. You're bringing flowers, dates every morning, these wonderful dresses, New Year's in marriage. You celebrate everything. You celebrate the first day, second day. You celebrate the first month. Eventually, as years goes by, you begin forgetting the anniversaries. I think our government, our leaders have probably reached the stage where they have begun to forget about the anniversary, and they are forgetting the season of flowers, the Valentine's Day, and everything. So because they have become so comfortable in that regard. But the problem with that is, if like it appears their most important goal is to hold on to power, that is not how you do it. If so and so, if a certain, like I hear in the rumors that someone wants to be the next one in power, if you want to endear yourself to the population, you have to have a balance between strong-handedness and public relations. The moment you feel that, you're playing a losing battle.
And Ugandans are very easy people to deal with. They are not hardcore people, you know. I mean, there are countries where people are hardcore and they are defined in their, you know, ideologies and philosophies that is very difficult to move them. If somebody is conservative, they are born conservative, end of, you know. Ugandans, we are very amenable people. We are easy to change. We are flexible. I think if I was in that position, there are so many routes I could take, you know, really to construct a very different picture, you know, and say, hey, guys, okay, there are all these problems.
The reason why...
yeah, you know, I could say, you know, there are these problems. I acknowledge there is problems here, but hey, look at me in my own right. This is who I am. This is what I promise. At the moment,
actually, sorry for it. If I had certain ambitions in this going, you'd be doing the job of sanitizing.
Absolutely.
You know, you'd be the one to be the voice of calm, the voice of reason. You know, we have certain elements within our sections that are doing ABC, you know, but we because let me tell you, like you said, Ugandans, what Ugandans need today, Ugandans are not listening to ideology. Ugandans are not listening to one who's political philosophy. No, they are not. Our population, and not disrespect to my country, our population has so many problems. To begin thinking about those nitty-gritties of someone who's overarching political philosophy, all they need is basic service delivery. I can tell you that if in these next 5 years, the government focused on basic service delivery, health service delivery, making sure there's medicine in the hospital, making sure people who are given tenders to provide medicine, actually medicine if it's there, basic service delivery, You will hear a shift
Education.
in the national conversation, and the opposition will have a very difficult time telling people, because you see, in a country whereby ochawa abantu siringi 10 obutegwa sabuni, I mean ekitole kya sabuni ne kilo ya sukali, and they vote for you in a country like that. That is how basic it needs to be. The bar is too low.
It is too low. In
The
a
bar
country where parents are struggling to get requirements for their kids, even though their kids haven't been to school for 2 years.
Yes.
Abazadde abamu ne babeera nga bagamba naye kati tukoze tutya mwongezeeyo okusoma tuwe ttamu zibbiri zokka ne twagala 3.
But also,
How
does it occur to you that there could be an issue of lack of confidence and faith in oneself? Because if you are used to getting things on the silver plate, it's difficult to see people criticize you for that.
But the thing is, I feel like if we start criticizing Mr. Muhoozi, we are even degrading ourselves. That's why my focus is on the president himself, because I think that the president can have rational discussions and actually interrogate some of these issues. I don't think Mr. Muhoozi has the capacity to interrogate these issues. So I don't even feel obliged to pull him into this conversation.
For me, my concern now, I don't know. There are people I don't know. To be honest, I don't know them, and I have not. So I can't. I don't know them, so I can't speak to who they are as people and what they stand for. For me, I speak to the government of Uganda, and for that, I'm speaking to the executive.
The president.
I'm speaking to the president of Uganda, because I have no play. I have no starting point.
At least the president is predictable. You can. Yeah.
For me, it's not even about predictability.
Yeah.
Because in what capacity should I discuss certain individuals? Because we are discussing the problem of Uganda. You see, when, again, on the question we're having, when people begin to go to Twitter,
exactly, that's where I was
to say that Mr. Museveni olinga kino, tulifena oba so and so olinga kino. For me, the right question we should be asking, I think I said that in the conversation we had about with the Stella Nyanzi a few months ago, that when we talk about things like people resorting to these kinds of communication, what we might call I don't know, is it what is the term they use? Offensive communication. When I think about these people, first of all, the first question I ask is, who is saying what? Now, as a person, I have a way I deal with things. Okay, there are people who will insult me, and I do not even respond to them because they're not worthy of the response. In my process of responding, my first question is, who has said what? Even on social media, when someone insults me, the first thing I do is to go to their profile to find out who is this. And oftentimes, it doesn't take long to know that, okay, well, because you can't wrestle with a pig. You might get dirty, and the pigs love it. So there are people I don't respond to. Now, there are people, when they say something, I pay attention. So a person of, let's say, Stella Nyanzi's caliber, a scholar, a person of Kakwenza's caliber, you pay attention. You pay attention. I would pay attention if he insulted me. But the question I ask is, so does somehow Kakwenza think, or let's say, or Stella think that by using this language, it can change the service delivery that she probably has a problem with? The answer is no. Unless this person is sick. But they know it doesn't. But the question shouldn't be, why are they abusing me? I should pay them back. The question is, how did we get to this? How did we get to a point as a country where our population is turning to, I don't know whether obscenity to express themselves? I always say this, and I always argue that when a child picks a broom, when you find a child trying to beat its father with a broom, who is bearing down on the mother with punches, the question to ask is, how stupid can this child be? That's not the right question to ask. That is a very shallow question to ask. It is not, this child, how stupid can they be? Do they think a broom can hurt their father? No, the question is, how did we get to this? For a child to be this desperate to pick up a broom. If our leaders can begin asking these fundamental questions, because I remember a time when the president was like a god in Uganda. I remember that time. I remember when I was a little boy. Now, I told you the story. Nze nabulako n'okubula nga nnyinze kulaba ku Museveni ku Ggombolola. Nengebe n'ogendeka nensula mu kibiina, nasula ntunula ng'ebibiina tebirimu na twali mitiyana. Nenzireka ne bankuba emiziŋŋoonyo. The following day.
Naye gwe nga president wa wamulabyeko.
Saabulaba namulaba. Natuuka wali nga wendaba omusajja abambadde amagye bano. Ngamba ono president. Whoever you saw, I thought he was the president. This is how I grew up. How did a person who grew up in this environment begin to use certain words in reference to the president? So when you see things like these happen, the question is not, is how did we get to this? So until we begin asking ourselves these questions, how did we as a country get to this? And how do we take a step back and reevaluate ourselves to ask the pertinent question? Because these are indicators of something systemic, something deep-rooted, which is, by the way, growing. Because you know why? Because when we continue treating symptoms, no kwata stera no musiba no bamu emiggo gyomukubye oyo no muteeka wali no kwata Kakwenza no bamu emiggo gyomukubye eyo no mukwata wali. What you fail to realize is wakubira stera emiggo Kakwenza yayitaliiwo. But having bitten stera emiggo, now you have a problem of Kakwenza.
So that makes two. It's created two now.
So what that means is, if emiggo were a solution, why come you stera? If emiggo and imprisonment was a solution to what you call offensive communication, then the first time it happened would have solved the problem. But if having done that before, you still have the same problem, then probably your solution is not working. So, and madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different result. Because what this does is you're not solving the problem.
Right.
You're trying to pepper off symptoms. Because because the reasons why these people are saying these things, the reasons why people are rising up, these
challenges haven't been resolved.
The challenges haven't been resolved. And as long as they are not resolved, but people will always keep coming up. And let me tell you, the law of unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
From Stella Nyanzi to Kakwenza to the state of the nation. Thank you so much for following us. We are going to continue having these discussions. Mr. Mitala, wrap up in 1 minute.
Very simple for me. As I said, it's a very sad day that we are sat here, talking about Kakwenza and this kind of things, trying to understand what has happened to him and what it means really for everybody really involved in this kind of conversation. But I think my closing remarks would be that clearly and absolutely, a theory of justice that does not afford, the accused person any right of defense, you know, is not fit to be defended whatsoever, and also it kind of baffles me really. How do you make an accusation against somebody in the darkness? This is darkness at noon. Seriously. Have the boldness to say that. Look here, because this is what civilized societies behave like. You offend me, I'll take you to court, and then we can tussle it out from there. If I win my case, there is even a possibility that you might pay my damages and so on and so forth. I think that's a far more effective way of resolving this kind of misunderstandings, other than going down the route of really clobbering people and treating them, in the manner in which we have been treated. And I think that level of lawlessness that kind of prevails around the whole country is really, really, really concerning. It's got to be concerning for everybody, really, because I sense, and we talked about this before, that chilling effect on the people, on the ability of people to have an involvement, a meaningful engagement, a meaningful discourse, in the affairs of their country. That chilling effect, you right now you can drop a teaspoon at Clock Tower, and you can hear the sound of that teaspoon dropping down in Bwai Sekazo. That's what is created. Everybody is like, everybody is just gone right, and that is clearly an indication that as a nation, we really have to be very clear on how we want to govern ourselves out of this kind of situation. It's just very, unsustainable. And on that note, guys, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys and those who are following us. For you, Henry and David, you really make me incompetent here. I'm sat I'm sandwiched between two PhD people, two doctors. I kind of worry for myself, but it's a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much.
That's where you are coming, man. You masters of law. You masters of law. Mr. Kajoba, wrap up. Let's close this conversation. Are you done?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Julius. It is always a great pleasure being here. I must say, it's been a while, and I've been rusty, but I've had such a great time in this conversation. But one day when I arrived, the first time I arrived in the Western world, I like to see things and ask questions. When I started to look at how things worked, and how these countries functioned, I took the time to visit museums. I've been to all these kinds of museums here, museums of history, museum of war, the aerospace museum. I've been around just to study and understand. I have paid attention to documentaries. I've worked in different places and I've seen how processes work. And I asked myself a question one day. How did these people get to where they are? Whereby people can disagree without being disagreeable. And one thing came to mind in one of my brooding moments. And I realized from my studying and research that a few years ago, some countries had people who asked contextual questions, to which they've designed contextual solutions. Now, it is not lost on me that you cannot necessarily transport and translate Western processes into our Ugandan context, because Uganda has unique problems. One of those is the definition of what it means to be Ugandan. As I've said here before, the Ugandan experience has largely failed. I mean, the Ugandan experiment has largely failed, because one of the challenges is how to navigate getting people who have different cultures and histories, and whose histories were intertwined and kind of polarized within each other, and then make them into one almost homogeneous nation. It is a very difficult experiment. But until, as a people, with our leaders taking the lead, sit down and ask contextual questions, not in light of them and where they see themselves as emperors, but in light of Uganda and the possibilities of the Ugandan experiment. Only then can Uganda begin to flirt with the idea of realizing its potential. Until we get to a point whereby people's humanity is not denied. Because to better somebody, you have to first deny their humanity. But until we acknowledge and realize and recognize the humanity of every single one of us as a people, regardless of titles, regardless of academic degrees, regardless of financial, social, whatever you call it, until we realize that I am Ugandan as a person who has never seen a blackboard, and and the president is as Ugandan as a person who owns nothing at all. Until that day, our country will continue to remain in the shadow of itself. But I'm optimistic. And I know that the long journey towards a stable country is tedious. It is frustrating. It is challenging and painful. But I want to reiterate and re-emphasize and remind those that are following us that history has taught us it doesn't matter how gloom and doom it might appear, that our tomorrow will always bring new questions and new challenges that will destabilize some of the held principles of today. And for that reason, one day, maybe not in our lifetimes, we will see a Uganda that works for everyone. I hope I live long enough to see it.
Our tomorrow must be greater than today. In summary, that's what Mr. Kajoba is telling us. Again, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us here today. For the new year, new conversations, similar challenges, similar problems, but hopefully new conceptual questions like Mr. Kajoba is challenging us to think and question and interact both with the information and the people and the humanities around us, knowing very well that we cannot have the ability to build a better Uganda unless we have the capacity to see each other as human beings. Indeed, I hope that day is coming soon. My name is Henry Ssali. This is the State of the Nation. Delighted to be here again. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much for following us.
This is the State of the Nation. Rifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The State of the Nation with Henry